She arrived as if she didn't want to be seen. A thrift store dress, clean but frayed at the hem. Her shoes, a pair of unsewn ballet flats that she had sewn by hand with kite string, didn't seem to belong in that white marble hall. The poor girl, with dark skin and downcast eyes, carried a laminated badge that read Volunteer Event Support. It was what allowed her to be there. And yet, it didn't seem like enough. While the guests glided around in evening gowns and tailored suits, the poor girl walked around the corners, always close to the walls, avoiding the eyes that didn't see her. She had been called by the organization to help with the backstage of the event, but what no one knew, not even she, was that her name was on the agenda that night. The main hall was an explosion of gold, velvet, and porcelain. Waiters passed by with gleaming trays. Voices laughed loudly in business conversation, and camera flashes flashed like lightning on a dry day. The poor girl, however, seemed to be in another world, one where she was just another shadow in the service of a luxury that did not belong to her. But there was something in her manner that stood out from the automatic servitude of the other employees. She wasn't there just out of obligation. Her eyes roamed the old books on the bookshelf, the Baroque paintings, the phrases carved into the ceiling. There was a thirst there, a thirst for something that can't be drunk from crystal glasses. One of the waiters discreetly called her to help with the glasses of sparkling wine that were missing in the West Wing. She nodded silently and headed toward the back of the room. No one noticed, but her fingers were trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from memory. This place smelled of something familiar, a memory that still had no name but was pulsing deep in her chest. It was then that she crossed paths with him, the host of the evening, the man who, upon seeing her there, would frown as if the world had shifted off its axis. The millionaire, and everything was about to change. He was leaning against the ornate fireplace, a glass of aged wine in his hand, and his usual air of superiority etched on his face. Tall, with impeccably combed-back gray hair, a burgundy bow tie matching the pocket square, the millionaire host of the evening was the picture of power dressed to impress. When the poor girl passed him, with her withdrawn posture and careful steps, he immediately noticed the difference. The look wasn't one of surprise. It was one of judgment. In the glittering crowd, she seemed like an out-of-focus blur, a noise out of tune, and it bothered him, like a blemish on a valuable painting. "Excuse me," she said softly, as she passed him carrying an empty tray. Her voice was low but firm, but he didn't answer. He just followed her with his eyes, cold as broken ice in a crystal glass. The millionaire leaned discreetly toward one of the security guards and whispered something. He didn't shout, he didn't gesture. He just pointed with his chin and said with disdain, "She's not on the official team. Get her out of here. She's out of place." And as in a theater where everyone knows their roles, the security guard just waved and walked towards the poor girl. No violence, no scandal, just a hand on the shoulder and the formal phrase, "Miss, please come with me. You cannot stay here." Her heart raced. She knew what that meant. So many times she had been taken from places where she was not welcome, even without doing anything, even though she had been invited. The entire room seemed to ignore the scene, but a few eyes caught the movement and smiled discreetly, as if confirming what they had expected. Poor girls don't belong at millionaires' parties. She was led to a side door, near the service stairs. As she walked, she felt the humiliation stick to her skin like fine dust, invisible to someone who has never had to leave through doors that only those who clean enter. Little did the millionaire know that he had just taken the real star of the night out of the room. She didn't resist, not because she was weak, but because she had learned from an early age that in certain battles, silence screams louder than any explanation. The poor girl walked alongside the security guard with her eyes glued to the polished marble floor. Each step felt like a judgment. Each muffled laugh that came from the rich audience seemed crueler than the last. "Poor thing. She must have infiltrated," murmured a woman in a silver dress adjusting her pearl necklace. "Who invited this girl?" whispered a white-haired man, looking with disdain at the plastic tag attached to her badge. The humiliation was not said out loud. It came in looks, in sarcastic smiles, and almost imperceptible gestures, as if that expulsion were a natural adjustment, a correction of an error in the script of that luxurious night. After all, what was a poor girl doing there? In their minds, the error was not the rejection. The error was the presence. The millionaire watched from afar. satisfied. For him, everything was resolved. One less blemish on his perfect night. He went back to drinking his wine while a photographer captured his best profile. But at the back of the room, someone was watching with different eyes. She was a gray-haired woman with a serene expression, a retired teacher, a special guest at the ceremony. She knew that look on the girl's face, a mix of restrained shame and wounded dignity, and that hurt her more than the expulsion itself, because she recognized there's something she had seen before, many times. The rejected talent behind the simple uniform, the glow that was extinguished before it was lit, the injustice treated as the natural order of things. As the poor girl walked out the side door, her badge hanging from her neck and the tray still in her hands, the room went into a frenzy. The music started again. The lights spun. The glasses clinked. But there was a subtle unease in the air, as if something important had just been lost without anyone knowing what it was. And outside, the night seemed colder. It was at that moment that an employee ran after her, with a white envelope in her hands. The door closed behind her with a muffled thud, and for a moment the silence of the night seemed to mock the hustle and bustle of the room she had just left. The poor girl stood motionless for a few seconds in the side hallway, unsure whether to feel anger, shame, or simply tiredness. Once again, she had been treated like someone who didn't belong. Once again, not because of what she had done, but because of what she seemed to be in the eyes of others. Invisible, unwanted, dispensable. She was about to take off her badge when she heard hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. "Wait," called a female voice. She turned around slowly, recognizing the employee with her hair tied back in a bun and wearing a blue uniform who also helped behind the scenes. She was one of the few who gave her a genuine smile throughout the day. This woman, even when overworked, always found time to offer her a glass of water or ask if everything was okay. "You forgot this," the clerk said, holding out a white envelope with the girl's name handwritten on it. She took the envelope, surprised. Is this for me?" she asked, as if she couldn't believe that someone had actually remembered her. The clerk nodded, breathless but smiling. "Yes, they gave it to me earlier so I could pass it on to you at the end of the event. They said it was important, but I think you need to read it now." The poor girl hesitated. Her hands, still trembling, tore open the flap of the envelope and pulled out the folded paper. Her eyes fixed on the first sentence. "It is with immense honor that we invite Miss Your Name to take the stage as the evening's featured guest, in recognition of her extraordinary contribution to basic education." She stopped. Her heart seemed to have stopped too. Slowly, she unfolded the rest of the letter and read the names of the judges, the event director, and the foundation symbol printed at the bottom. This was not a joke. This was not a mistake. She had been awarded. She was the reason for that event to exist, and she had been kicked out for being mistaken for an intruder. She looked back at the door she had been led out of minutes before. Inside, people were about to cheer her name, unaware that they had already turned their faces toward her, and the poor girl began to smile, not out of anger, but with the serenity of someone who knew, deep down in her soul, that her worth was never in the hands of those who despised her. She reread the words like someone trying to wake up from a dream, or a nightmare with a surprising ending. The paper in her hands trembled not from fear, but from the intensity of what it represented. For the first time, someone had looked beyond her simple clothes, beyond her status, beyond her helper badge. The letter was clear. She would be called to the stage that night in front of everyone present to receive the Young Rising Star Humanitarian Award, offered by the Fundación Filos de Terra. The honor was for her social project, which she had started 3 years earlier in a makeshift room in the back of her neighborhood church. There, she taught children who had never set foot in a school to read and write, children from invisible families, like her. For years, she had done this in silence. She sewed notebooks together from scraps, reused broken pencils, and made posters with expired paint. She didn't ask for help. She didn't post on social media. She just taught, because she knew firsthand what it was like to grow up without anyone to believe in her. But someone saw. Unbeknownst to her, one of the mothers of her young students had nominated her for the award. And one of the foundation's judges, a renowned writer who was touched by the simplicity of her story, decided that she would be the honoree of the evening. This was her night. Her name was on the official program. She should have walked through the front door, been greeted with flowers, a microphone, and applause. but it was received with contempt, expelled for being mistaken for someone outside the norm. And now, with the letter in her hands, she felt a knot in her chest, between pride, hurt, and a silent dignity that was all too familiar to her. She looked up, trying to hold back her tears. She thought of her mother, who worked as a cleaner and could never accompany her to school events. She thought of the students, of their small hands holding up notebooks made of cardboard. She thought of what that letter meant. It wasn't just an award. It was recognition that she existed, that she mattered. And the most ironic thing, she was outside the event itself. With tears in her eyes and a burning heart, she took a deep breath. She carefully folded the letter, put it in her dress pocket, and murmured to herself, "Now they're going to have to listen to me." As she held the letter in her still shaky hands, the poor girl's mind began to travel back in time. It was impossible not to go back to the days when everything seemed so distant, when the world of education, culture, and gala events was just a blurred reflection seen through the bus window. Now, even on the edge of that luxurious hall, she carried in her pocket proof that her existence, until then ignored, had finally been noticed. The strongest memory came to her like a whiff of the day she set up her first classroom, with scraps of cardboard and a blackboard salvaged from the school trash. Her youngest student was 3 years old and had never heard his own name written. Her oldest student was a teenager who took care of 4 siblings and cried every time she learned a new word. The poor girl taught them all, with a firm voice, a loving look, and a courage she herself didn't know where it came from. But her past went beyond improvised classes. It was marked by rejections that began early. At 8 years old, she was prevented from joining the school's literary club for not having appropriate clothes. At 10, she saw her mother being humiliated for cleaning the bathrooms of the same institution where the children of the elite studied. At 13, she began working in secret to buy her own books that she read by candlelight, while her neighbors said, "That won't get you anywhere." And yet she persisted. Each page read was an escape. Each child taught, a seed planted. The poor girl, even without knowing it, was building something bigger than herself, something that night, about to be recognized, was still invisible to the eyes of those who judged her by her appearance. She stared at the door of the salon, feeling a chill in her stomach. The pain of being kicked out still throbbed, but there was a flame burning inside her chest. It wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about not letting other poor girls go through the same. She knew that if she went back now, they would look at her differently, but not because of who she was, but because of the prize. And that was exactly what she wanted to change. Before the award arrived, before her name was written on any golden certificate, it all began in silence. No sponsorship, no NGO, no cell phone camera. Just her. A few children hungry for knowledge and as hungry to change the world as she herself felt when she was little. The project that would give rise to that night's tribute came from a single gesture. A street child asked for help with her name so she could fill out a form. It was a simple request, but it opened a portal into the poor girl's memory. She had also signed her name with an X. She had also pretended to know how to read so as not to be the butt of jokes. She had also felt the pain of becoming less because she did not master the words that gave shape to her life. That day, she sat down on the floor with the boy and began to teach him the alphabet, one stroke at a time. The following week, he brought his sister, then 2 more friends. Before she knew it, there were 7 children walking along the sidewalk next to her house every day at 5 o'clock. And the poor girl, without a chair, without a board, without chalk, without a salary, had become a teacher. Over time, she managed to find a small space in the back of the neighborhood church. She asked for donations of used books, built shelves out of crates, and improvised tables out of old doors. Each student received a recycled notebook, made from used paper from an office that was going to throw everything away. Her mother helped clean the place during her time off from work as a cleaner. And to each new child that arrived, she would say, "You don't need money to have value, you just need to believe." No newspapers appeared. No authorities went there. But within 2 years, more than 50 children learned to read and write from her. Some went to public schools for the first time. Others wrote letters of thanks in crooked but truthful handwriting. It was because of these stories that, without knowing it, she was nominated for the award. A careful jury, made up of educators and philanthropists, was moved by the anonymous description sent by a former student mother. She is just a poor girl, but she teaches like a queen. And that night, the invisible crown she carried in her heart would finally be seen. While outside the poor girl was deciding whether to return, inside the hall the mood began to change. The host, the millionaire who had ordered her to be removed, was now giving a pompous speech, praising the values of philanthropy, social inclusion, and the appreciation of youth. Today, more than ever, we recognize talents that flourish in the most unlikely places, he said, unaware of the cruel irony his words carried. The audience listened, applauded, and drank more wine. Some journalists prepared their flashes to record the moment when the main award of the night was presented. It was the most anticipated part of the event, the announcement of the young revelation of the year, a new tradition of the foundation that sought to recognize projects that impact communities in vulnerable situations. The master of ceremonies took the microphone, his voice deep and slow. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the most anticipated moment of the evening. I ask for everyone's attention for the reveal of the name that moved our judging panel, and that represents hope in the form of concrete action. The lights dimmed, soft instrumental music began to play, and a screen in the background displayed the words, Young Revelation Humanitarian Award. First place, poor girl, popular educator, from Villa Nova Esperanza. A buzz filled the room. Everyone looked around. No young woman was coming up on stage. No girl in a simple dress. No girl with flowers in her hand. No girl with tears in her eyes of gratitude. The chair reserved for her, right in front of the stage, was empty. The master of ceremonies consulted with the team. The pale event coordinator discreetly went up to whisper something in his ear. It seems there was a mistake. She was removed from the hall. They thought she was an intruder. The microphone picked up part of the whisper. The first reactions of astonishment began to emerge. Murmurs cut the air like thin knives. Her name was on everyone's lips, but she wasn't there to hear it. And the millionaire, standing in the corner of the stage, choked on his own arrogance. Because without knowing it, he had taken from the hall the soul of the night. For a few moments the entire room was silent, an uncomfortable, heavy silence, the kind that says more than 1,000 words. The camera that would capture the award ceremony remained still, not knowing where to point. The professional photographer lowered his lens, disconcerted. The automatic applause stopped in the air, as if everyone had realized that something serious had just happened. Her name, of the poor girl, was still displayed on the giant screen, next to the blurred image that some judge had captured on the day of the selection. It was a simple photo, taken with a cell phone where she appeared smiling next to the children, holding a used box of chalk. The event coordinator ran backstage while the master of ceremonies tried to improvise something. There was a small setback, but we will resolve it. The honoree will be invited back to the stage in a few moments. But the guests already knew. They had already understood. Poor girl was kicked out of her own event. And then everyone began to look in one direction, at the man who until then had been the center of the party, the millionaire still holding the glass in his hand, now with a tense and colorless face. Someone whispered, "He was the one who ordered her to be taken away from here." The buzz grew like wildfire. He ordered it removed because he thought she was an intruder, the honoree, the star of the night, a poor girl, and he sent her away. The embarrassment set in. The looks that had previously flattered him now analyzed him critically. He tried to maintain his composure, but there was no longer any pose that could sustain that shame. For the first time in a long time, the millionaire felt the weight of his own prejudice, and the weight of public exposure. Outside, the poor girl was being handed her badge back by the employee's trembling hands. She didn't yet know that her name had been announced. She didn't yet know that the entire room had stopped because of her, but something in his chest was already pulsing strongly, the feeling that that story, finally, would no longer be erased. The event coordinator hurried across the room, not caring about her heels that clicked crookedly on the marble floor. He reached the back and opened the side door with his heart pounding. Outside, he found a scene he would never forget. The poor girl, sitting on the cold step of the service entrance, holding the envelope with the award letter in her lap, her eyes red and her posture firm, as if she had already cried enough for a lifetime. You need to go back," the woman said, almost breathless. The girl looked up suspiciously. "Why? So they can kick me out again?" No, it's because, it's because you're the main honoree. They just announced your name. The room stopped. Everyone is waiting for you. There was silence. She didn't know if she believed it. The pain of humiliation still weighed heavily on her shoulders. But inside, a strength began to rise up again. Not as fury, but as dignity. A dignity that had always been there even when no one saw it. The clerk held out her hand and the poor girl stood up. As I walked back down the hallway, each step was like a musical note rising in the score of my own story. I was no longer an invisible victim. I was the central figure in a narrative that broke with centuries of exclusion. When the door opened and she entered the hall, a deep silence spread, as if time had stopped. All eyes turned to her, not because of the simplicity of the dress, not because of the improvised badge, but because of impact of your presence. She walked down the red carpet with her head held high, holding the envelope that had once seemed like a mistake but was now the symbol of delayed justice. The master of ceremonies, visibly moved, simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen, with you, the real owner of this night." And that's when something unprecedented happened. The entire room stood up. No music, no dramatic lights, just clapping, slow, sincere, regretful. The poor girl was now the giant of that night. She climbed the steps to the stage with the lightness of someone carrying the world on her shoulders, but with the firmness of someone who had finally been seen. The microphone was waiting for her, but she hesitated for a moment. She took a deep breath, looked at the audience still standing, and held the envelope as if holding her heart. No one knew what she would say. The master of ceremonies had stepped back, leaving her the center of the stage. The coordinator watched her with teary eyes. The badge agent stood in the corner, clasping her hands to her chest. And the millionaire, well, he was sitting, head down, in the middle of the front row. The same man who had thrown her out of the party now seemed small, swallowed up by his own silence. The poor girl approached the microphone and said, "Good evening, my name is Ayla. I am the daughter of Mrs. Marlene, a cleaning lady. I grew up cleaning chairs like these, many times without being able to sit on them." The first sentence already made the room hold its breath. I was rejected in many rooms. I was treated as if my presence polluted the air of certain environments. And today, I am here, not for revenge, but because I believe that every story can be rewritten. She stopped, her eyes watery but steady. This award is not just mine. It belongs to the children I taught in cardboard classrooms. It belongs to my mother, who cleaned the bathrooms where rich girls cried over poor grades, while I cried because I didn't even have a notebook. It belongs to the invisible, to those who don't have a strong surname, or any surname at all. It belongs to every poor girl who was silenced, and now understands that her voice has value. The room was silent. Today, the world wanted to throw me out, and it was the first time that this happened in front of a crowd. Because normally the world throws us out in silence, ignores us, pretends we don't exist. She then looked straight at the millionaire. He looked up and, for the first time, felt something that money could never buy. Real shame. "I forgive you," she said, "but I want you to understand that taking me out of the salon was never the problem. The problem is the system that takes us out of everything. From schools, from opportunities, from awards, and from dignity." There was silence. And then, the applause came again. But now they weren't just out of admiration, they were for respect. As soon as she stepped off the stage, Ayla expected nothing but silence. She was used to living without the world's applause, even when she had done more than many of the award winners over the years. But this time, something different happened. The first to stand up was one of the judges, a white-haired man, known for his strictness at awards ceremonies. He walked over to her and, without saying a word, hugged her as if recognizing a rare greatness. One by one, the guests began to approach. Some still had tears in their eyes. Others were visibly embarrassed to have been part of an environment that had rejected her minutes before. Ayla, the poor girl, became the center of attention, but not the superficial kind of attention, full of forced flattery. It was a different kind of look, one of genuine admiration, of belated reparation. With each new hug, she felt the wounds of years of exclusion begin to mend. Slowly but surely, journalists approached. Cameras began to record. Questions arose. Who taught you to have this strength? Do you have social media? How can we help your project? And for the first time, Ayla realized the power of her story. Not because it made the news, but because could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, the event coordinator, still emotional, did something unexpected. She took the microphone again and announced that the foundation would create a new permanent category on the award, with her name on it. Ayla Award, Courage and Education on the margins. The entire room burst into applause. The poor girl, who grew up being pulled out of lines, silenced in classes, kept away from dreams, was now a reference, a symbol, a name that would be printed on trophies, on websites, on posters for future generations. From the other side of the room, the millionaire watched everything, standing still, without the strength to applaud, nor the courage to approach. But now, he knew who she was, and the whole world too. When the applause died down, the organizing team asked Ayla to stay in the hall a little longer. There were more people wanting to meet her, more reporters appearing out of nowhere, more dignitaries arriving late to applaud what they had never even seen being born. It was then that a man approached, different from the others. Discreet suit, soft speech, attentive eyes. He introduced himself as the director of a large educational network, the same group that, in the past, had never accepted social projects in its headquarters. Now, he wanted to hire her. We have projects in several regions of the country. With your story, your charisma, we can bring you in front of the cameras for lectures, and of course a formal contract, a compatible salary, everything registered. You deserve this, Ayla. She smiled kindly. It was a good proposal, a very good one, maybe even fair, considering how much she had already done without any return. But something in her soul, that giant soul, urged her to calm down. She thanked him but replied, "I'm just a poor girl, and I didn't learn to teach to become a stage symbol. I taught because it was what I knew how to do best. And if I'm going to continue, I want to continue where I started, on the sidewalk, with my students." The director fell silent. For a few seconds he seemed disappointed, but when he looked into her eyes he understood. He was in front of someone who would not sell himself for the spotlight, who would not trade roots for varnish. Meanwhile, the murmur in the hall was only one. She said no. I said no to what many would call a golden opportunity. I said no to being turned into a product. I said no to the system that only accepts the poor when they no longer seem poor. And that no echoed, because in that moment, Ayla was proving something even greater than winning. She was choosing how she wanted. Keep winning. Far from golden bars, close to reality, and without ever ceasing to be who he always was, the poor girl who taught how to read, with her soul. The next morning, Ayla woke up to the sun shining through the cracks in the window, but something was different. The old house phone kept ringing. The voicemail on her borrowed cell phone was full, and when she went out in her simple flip-flops to get bread, as she did every day, she was surprised by something she had never heard before. People were looking at her with respect. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was admiration. The newspaper vendor on the corner pointed to the stand. "Look here, girl. You're on the cover of the newspaper. The poor girl who taught the city to see." The local public school, where she had previously been rejected as a volunteer, now had its principal at the door waiting for her with flowers. "We want you to teach here, Ayla. You don't need a degree to teach what the world has forgotten." Even the neighbors who had been whispering before now came closer. One of them said, "You became the pride of the neighborhood. You became the hope of those who were never seen." As she walked through the streets, children followed her. Students in her project called her famous teacher. She smiled, but deep down she knew that none of that changed the essential. She was still the same, the poor girl with the soul of an educator. And that day when she arrived at the project's improvised space, in the small room made of crates and cardboard, she found something that made her really cry. Someone had donated books, lots of them. There were also new backpacks, chalkboards, snacks, and a note, anonymous, written in blue pen. "You didn't win alone. You made us believe that you can win too." Ayla cried silently, not from sadness, but from something rare, recognition. For the first time she saw that her story would not be just hers, that what she had built with crumbs was now inspiring entire cities, and maybe, just maybe, the world was beginning to understand that the greatest prize of all is not a golden plaque, but the power to change realities with the heart. That night, back in her small room, Ayla sat in front of the window. The dress she had worn to the event was still hanging on the wall, next to the faded backpack that had always accompanied her. She ran her hand over both objects as if caressing the past and the future at the same time. The city was quiet, but on social media her story was already spreading like wildfire. Videos of her speech went viral. Influencers commented. Public figures apologized for having judged her without knowing. But none of that went to her head. Because deep down, Ayla knew that the most important applause did not come from the world, but from the clear conscience of someone who has never stopped being who she is. In the community, they decided to paint a mural, and on it they wrote, "Here lives Ayla, the poor girl who taught us to dream with our feet on the ground." The millionaire, in turn, was never the same again. He canceled interviews and stayed out of the spotlight. But one day, he discreetly showed up at the project site. He didn't say much. He didn't want to take pictures. He just looked around, saw the children sitting on the floor with books on their laps, and left an anonymous donation in the cardboard box with a short note. "Sorry, and thank you for showing me what true greatness is." Ayla never needed his forgiveness, but receiving that gesture was like closing a cycle. Not because he had redeemed himself, but because she had overcome it. She was now more than a poor girl. She was a symbol. She was a beacon. She was history. And every time someone tried to erase someone like her, with simple clothes, worn shoes, or eyes that carry the world, would remember Ayla. Because the real transformation was not what she experienced. It was the world that changed because I saw her. And on that silent night, looking at the moon in the sky, Ayla smiled. She knew the prize was not the crystal trophy, nor the flowers, nor the name in the newspapers. The real prize was never again need to ask who she was.